Welcome to Hard Script.
I'm not proud of the split-second moment that changed everything, but I can't erase it either. I took a breath, looked at her in the kitchen, and heard myself say, "My exit, my choice." Those words landed harder than any scream could. She had just said, with a calm so lethal it felt surgical, "My body, my rules." That phrase wasn't about boundaries. Not really. It was about dominion, her weapon wrapped in autonomy. We were barely past our 5th anniversary. Married young. Built something sweet. Had laughter in small rooms, Sunday morning pancakes, lazy conversations with no urgency. But something had shifted. She stopped inviting me in. Started drawing lines around herself. Withheld affection as if it were a trophy. Framed every request for connection like a trespass. I tried to brush it off. Stress. Work exhaustion. Life chaos. Right? But weekends felt like negotiations. I asked for touch, a shared look, a hand on my shoulder. She said, "Maybe later." Not a reason. A pretext. And I didn't fight back. I didn't bargain. I stood there, shrinking. That morning, she stepped out of the shower, wrapped in freshness and control. I made coffee across the room, waited for the "you go first" moment. She crossed her arms and said it, as if she believed she was immune to consequence. "My body, my rules." My chest contracted. This was not a question. It was a closing statement. In my head, the script flipped. He doesn't stay because you say "my rules." He stays because he's needed. And I wasn't. So I walked out to the backyard patio while her voice echoed behind me. She didn't follow. She didn't yell. She didn't need to. In the shadow of that slender door, I realized endurance isn't love. And submission isn't partnership. I didn't argue. I didn't plead. I only whispered to the air. My exit, my choice. Because boundaries turned into borders. Control disguised as autonomy. And intimacy drained not with malice, but by erosion. It was the moment I stopped shrinking. I started planning. She thought she was enforcing rules. I decided to enforce freedom. I didn't leave that day. Not physically. That would have been too easy for her to dismiss. Some dramatic outburst she could call overreacting. Instead, I stayed. I worked late. I made less noise. I moved through our house like a guest in a quiet Airbnb, never complaining, never interrupting her world. And that was the point. If she wanted autonomy, she could have it. Fully. Without me orbiting around her, begging for crumbs of attention. I wasn't going to be her emotional backup plan. Not anymore. That first night, I came home late. She was on the couch scrolling through her phone, legs crossed like she owned the silence. She looked up once, then back down. No kiss. No "how was your day?" Just ambient noise from a reality show I didn't recognize. I sat on the edge of the bed later, staring at the floor while she brushed her teeth. No conversation. No tension either. Just that dull absence of effort. The most polite kind of rejection. She climbed into bed, back turned, phone in hand. I didn't reach out. I turned off the light and let the silence harden into habit. Over the next few days, I started reclaiming space. I moved some clothes out of our shared closet and into the guest room. No announcement. No argument. Just movement. I changed the password on my laptop, locked down my personal files, logged out of the joint streaming accounts. I could feel her watching, but she never asked why. Because deep down, she knew. You see, when someone slowly withdraws, without rage, without demands, what remains is deafening. And she wasn't ready for that kind of silence. She had relied on me being available, soft, hopeful. She used to control the thermostat of intimacy, turning it up when she felt generous, shutting it off when it suited her. But I stopped reaching for the dial. I started packing lunches for one. I went to the gym without mentioning it. I switched to a solo savings account. These were small things. Quiet things. But each one carved out distance with surgical precision. And when control was her language, indifference became mine. She thought my exit would be loud. Instead, it was methodical. This wasn't abandonment. It was preparation. She thought I was still there, just quiet. But I was already halfway gone. And she hadn't even noticed. Until it was too late. About 2 weeks after I started retreating, something shifted in her tone. It wasn't affection. It wasn't regret. It was confusion, subtle, but sharp. The kind that comes when a person realizes their usual tools stopped working. She leaned against the kitchen doorway one evening and casually asked if I wanted to watch a movie. We hadn't done that in months. I told her I had a project to finish. Her smile twitched, just slightly. The next morning, she offered me coffee. Not in a warm, thoughtful way, but in a transactional tone, like she was rebalancing the scales just enough to pull me back in. I thanked her and poured my own. She was used to a rhythm. Distance, silence, guilt, reconnection. She'd cycle through it a dozen times before I caught on. But this time, I didn't engage. Because here's the part no one warns you about. When you grow used to emotional starvation, even small scraps feel like a feast. But once you've stepped away, once your system adjusts to self-worth instead of chasing validation, those scraps don't tempt you anymore. They repulse you. She tried again 3 days later. She asked if I wanted to go out to eat. Sushi. My favorite. I said I already had plans with a friend from work. I didn't. But that lie wasn't betrayal. It was self-preservation. Because I wasn't ready to be reabsorbed into her system. Not now. Maybe not ever. She didn't argue. But that night, I caught her staring at me while I brushed my teeth. Like I was a stranger she couldn't place, or a ghost she wasn't sure was real. She went to bed before I did. Didn't say goodnight. Didn't ask questions. Control doesn't know how to beg. It only knows how to withhold. But when the person being controlled learns the power of stillness, the entire game collapses. I wasn't angry. I wasn't bitter. I was just done. And that scared her more than any confrontation could. Because rage still means you care. Silence means it's over. Not loud. Not dramatic. Just over. And the woman who once told me, my body, my rules, was now standing in a house where every room echoed with a different phrase. My exit. My choice. One night, almost a month into the silence, she reached for my hand on the couch. It wasn't a soft, instinctive gesture. It was deliberate, mechanical, like she was pressing a button to see what response she'd get. And for a second, I felt that old urge, like muscle memory, to lean in, to thaw. But then I remembered something I'd taught myself the hard way. Just because affection returns doesn't mean it's real. Sometimes, it's just another form of control. She leaned her head slightly toward mine. No words. No explanation. And I knew exactly what she was doing. She wasn't reconnecting. She was recalibrating. Trying to reestablish the bare minimum emotional output to keep me tethered, without ever having to confront what she'd withheld in the first place. I pulled my hand back. Not harshly. Not coldly. Just without invitation. She blinked, then looked down, but said nothing. And that nothing said everything. Because people who care, really care, don't calculate their warmth. They don't wait until they feel distance to finally offer connection. They give without fear, without strings. And for years, I mistook her delayed affection for depth. I thought maybe she was just guarded, or tired, or not in the mood. But now I saw it clearly. She wasn't struggling to connect. She was rationing intimacy like currency, only spending when she feared loss. That night, I moved the last of my clothes into the guest room. No dramatic door slams. No confrontations. She saw me carrying a box down the hall and didn't ask where I was going. She just stepped aside, like it was easier to pretend nothing was happening than admit everything was. And I realized then, she didn't miss me. She missed the version of me who stayed no matter how little he received. But that man was gone. In his place stood someone she never prepared for. A version of me who could love quietly, leave quietly, and never look back. Because the most powerful exit isn't the one where you slam the door. It's the one where you never ask if it's okay to leave. You just go, and by the time they realize you're not coming back, you're already free. A week after I moved into the guest room, she left a folded note on my nightstand. Not a text, not a conversation. A handwritten letter, 2 pages long. It was her first attempt at vulnerability in maybe years. She wrote about her childhood, how her parents divorced in silence, how her mother raised her to believe that control was the only safety. She admitted she had issues with intimacy. That withholding made her feel powerful in relationships. That giving too much felt like weakness. And then, buried at the bottom, she wrote, "It's not that I didn't love you. I just didn't know how to let you in without losing myself." For a moment, I stared at those lines, feeling something twist in my chest. Not pain, not hope, recognition. Because those words didn't feel like an apology. They felt like a defense, an explanation designed to make her withholding look like strength. And I'd lived in the shadow of that logic for too long. I used to beg for clarity, for touch, for effort. Now she was offering stories, wrapped in nostalgia, timed just late enough to feel manipulative. If she had said this a year ago, maybe I would have listened. But I'd stopped wanting reasons. I only wanted truth. And truth doesn't arrive in folded notes. It shows up in who someone is, in how they touch you without being asked, in how they stand beside you without needing a crisis to provoke it, in how they choose you, not when they feel you slipping, but when you're right in front of them, steady, present, hoping. I didn't respond to the note. I left it where I found it. The next morning, she asked if I read it. I said yes. She waited for more. I gave her nothing. Not to punish, not to hurt, but because I wasn't angry anymore. And once you stop being angry, you stop engaging. The silence between us wasn't heavy anymore. It was clean, purposeful. She could write volumes. But my absence said more than her words ever could. Something shifted the day after that note. Not in me. I'd already stepped away inside. But in her. She started lingering near me again, making small talk, asking if I wanted coffee, offering to cook dinner. Touch in her voice, not her hands. Still distant, still hesitant, but different. Except it wasn't real closeness. It was proximity in disguise, like being near me would undo the distance she'd built. I watched it happen like someone watching their reflection walk away. That Saturday, I came back from the gym and found her sitting on the couch, legs tucked beneath her, scrolling through old photos on her phone. Our wedding photos. When she looked up, her eyes were already glistening. She didn't cry. She just asked, "Do you ever miss how we used to be?" I didn't flinch. I told her, "I miss who I used to be." And that landed, harder than I expected, because that's what she never understood. This wasn't about the past. It was about how long I'd been shrinking to make the present tolerable. That week, I started making quiet moves. I met with a realtor. I transferred half our joint funds to a separate account I'd set up months earlier. I found a furnished rental across town, short-term, clean, detached from everything we'd shared. No announcement, no fight, just quiet arrangements. The kind you make when you're not looking for permission. She noticed the shift, asked if something was wrong. I said nothing, because she didn't deserve my words anymore. Not when her silence had cost me years. She used to control everything by withholding. Now she was watching it slip, because control only works on someone who still wants to stay. And I didn't. I'd stopped hoping she'd change. I wasn't waiting for warmth. I wasn't holding my breath for a sudden breakthrough. What I wanted now was peace, distance, my own space, untouched by her rules, her moods, her rhythms. I wasn't trying to win. I was trying to disappear from the war. And that kind of quiet, the deliberate kind, it terrifies people who only know power through conflict. She wasn't afraid when I used to argue. But now she looked at me like I'd become a ghost she could still see, but couldn't reach. And that's when I knew I had all the power I ever needed, because I no longer wanted hers. I left on a Tuesday. No ceremony, no final conversation, just a quiet morning, cold coffee, and keys on the counter. The apartment I'd rented was already stocked. New linens, new furniture, no memories, no echoes. I didn't leave a note, not out of cruelty, but because I owed her nothing she hadn't already returned in silence. She used to tell me, "You'll get intimacy when I decide." So I made a decision of my own. She thought I'd rage, plead, try to fix us again. She expected drama, maybe tears. But what she got was emptiness. I changed my number the same day, disconnected the shared accounts. I even notified the bank and the landlord, removed her name from everything that had once linked us. It wasn't revenge. It was restoration. It's amazing how calm you become once you stop fighting for someone who never fought for you. The only thing I kept was a single photo. Not of us. Just me, before her. Before I gave away my boundaries trying to earn love that should have never been transactional. That week, she messaged me through email. 3 lines. "Where are you? Can we talk? This isn't like you." She was right. It wasn't. But it should have been. For too long, I had confused loyalty with self-betrayal. I thought enduring meant loving. But now I understood. Silence wasn't weakness. It was finality. A week passed. Then 2. She kept reaching out. More emails. Even sent a message through a mutual friend. I didn't reply. Not because I was angry, but because there was no version of me left to speak to her. I deleted her photos from every device. Threw out the gifts. Donated the last shirt she bought me. Even changed my gym and took a new route to work. Erasure is painful when you do it out of spite. But when you do it for peace, it's liberation. One evening, I got a call from her sister. She left a voicemail, said she hadn't heard from me, that my wife was worried, that she didn't recognize the man I'd become. She was right. He was gone. And the man who took his place? He didn't wait for permission. He didn't chase closure. He didn't bleed for someone who handed him a bandage with conditions. He just walked away and never looked back. It had been over a month. The messages stopped. The silence grew roots. Then one Friday evening, just after I got back from a jog, I saw her standing outside my new place. No warning. No text. Just her, nervous, holding her coat too tightly, like she hadn't decided whether to beg or scream. She didn't know how I'd react. But she came anyway. I didn't invite her in. She asked if we could talk. I stayed in the doorway, arms crossed, steady. She started explaining how things had been hard for her, that she'd been reflecting, that she realized how much damage she'd done. Her voice shook, but her eyes were still scanning me, for weakness, for regret, for a way in. But I gave her nothing. She said, "I didn't know you'd actually leave." That was the moment, because in that sentence was everything. She never believed I had the strength to choose myself. She was used to me folding, to me hoping, to me clinging to the pieces while she held the whole puzzle hostage. So she stood there now, face bare, emotions raw, not to take accountability, but because she missed the power she had over the version of me who stayed. I let her speak. She brought up our good memories. The trip to Portland. The anniversary dinner where we slow danced under bad lighting. The night I held her through a panic attack and never asked for anything back. But all of it felt like a tactic. A well-produced montage meant to trigger nostalgia, not growth. When she realized I wasn't breaking, her tone shifted. She accused me of abandoning her. Said I was being cold. That I'd turned into someone else. I didn't flinch. Because she still didn't get it. She didn't lose me when I left. She lost me long before. When my body, my rules stopped being about boundaries and became about control. There's a difference between privacy and punishment, between choosing intimacy and weaponizing it. And she crossed that line so many times, it stopped looking like a line at all. I told her I wished her well. Then I closed the door. No drama, no screaming, just the soft finality of someone who no longer wants anything from you. She didn't knock again. And for the first time in years, I slept like I didn't owe anyone an apology for choosing peace. You don't really know who someone is until they lose control of the narrative. Weeks passed. I focused on my routine, early mornings, clean meals, lifting heavy things to remember I still could. I started writing again. Not about her. Not about us. Just about clarity. About silence. About rediscovering what it means to exist without explanation. Then a mutual friend texted me. She's been talking. Says you left out of nowhere. That you shut down, refused to talk. I didn't reply. Later, someone else told me she claimed I'd been emotionally distant for months. That I gave up on her when she needed space. It was surreal, hearing the version where I vanished without warning, where her withholding wasn't the slow burn of emotional abandonment, but just protecting herself. It could have angered me. Instead, it affirmed everything. Because when people are confronted with the consequences of their behavior, they either take ownership or they rewrite the story so they don't have to. She chose fiction. She needed the world to believe she was the one left behind, not the one who pushed me to the edge of disappearance. I didn't correct her, didn't post screenshots, didn't text back mutuals to clear the air. Because when you've actually moved on, truth stops needing defense. Let her have her audience. Let her perform the pain she never showed me in private. That wasn't my concern anymore. What mattered was that, in my new life, I didn't flinch when I saw her name. Didn't pause songs that reminded me of her. Didn't feel like a man who'd been robbed of anything. I hadn't lost. I'd let go. And there's a difference. When someone tells the story of your silence like it was cruelty, it's because they were never ready to see it as strength. She was. She saw the man who once bent over backwards for scraps of warmth. Stand still, unmoved, unreachable. And she couldn't make sense of that. So she turned silence into betrayal, still thinking it was about power. But power isn't control. It's peace. And mine didn't come from revenge. It came from absence. From building a world so full of truth that her lies couldn't breathe inside it. Healing didn't come loud. There was no "I'm back" moment. No parade for surviving. Just mornings that didn't hurt. Coffee that tasted like more than a distraction. A version of me that could sit alone and not feel like I was missing anything. That's when I met Erin. Not in a movie scene way. No sparks. No violins. Just two people who ended up sitting next to each other at a friend's dinner party. She asked real questions, then waited for real answers. Didn't flinch when I spoke about the past. Didn't rush to fill silences. She didn't make me feel like I had to earn connection through performance. And I didn't look at her like a solution. Because for the first time in years, I didn't need one. We talked about everything but love. Travel. Music. Grief. She told me about losing her brother. I told her about losing myself. And at the end of the night, when she smiled and said, "You're really calm," I realized she didn't know who I used to be. The man begging for affection. Walking on eggshells. Trying to decode moods and salvage dead moments with jokes and small talk. He was gone. Not bitter. Not broken. Just gone. And in his place was someone who'd learned that intimacy isn't something you chase. It's something that meets you halfway. Or not at all. I didn't pursue Erin. We exchanged numbers. Talked occasionally. But I didn't rush it. Didn't mold myself to be likable. Didn't over-explain. And that was the most powerful part. I wasn't desperate to be chosen. Because I'd already chosen myself. When people hear stories like mine, they wait for the big twist. That she came back. That I forgave her. That we started fresh. But some stories don't need sequels. Some doors stay closed, not out of spite, but because peace lives on the other side. And that peace? It wasn't loud or vengeful. It was simple. It was me, walking into a quiet apartment, taking off my shoes, pouring a drink, and knowing this life, this version of me, was built by every boundary I finally had the courage to keep. Support the channel by liking, commenting, and subscribing. I promise even more interesting stories.